I've been an open source user for ages and a dress person. And I figured I would get a little more practice with Inkscape while doing this demo. So, I've got a little introductory material about Inkscape, vector graphics versus rasterized, why it's a good idea to use vector graphics for your diagrams and posters. And then we'll have a few demos, and we might choose the one that's most interesting, or two that are most interesting to actually go through together and get familiar with the interface and all the tools and all of the little quirks about Inkscape. Or not all of them, because there are a ton of tools and quirks about Inkscape. So the first kind of thing I'll ask is, does anyone here, has anyone here not seen vector graphics versus raster or bitmap graphics?
Not on the screen.
Okay, but have you ever like understood the concept of it before? Yeah. Okay. Lots of feedback there. So so the basic the two basic types of graphics that you come along are vector graphics or bitmap graphics, and rasterization is taking a vector graphic and making it a bitmap graphic. And your display shows bitmaps. All printing ends up being essentially a form of bitmap. There's slight differences depending on the printing method.
Bitmap and rasterized synonymous?
Rasterized is specifically if it's vector to bitmap. If you were to take a picture of something, that, yeah, it's not already converted. So a lot of people just use it interchangeably when they're talking about diagrams and that kind of stuff. The kind of overview of vector versus bitmap: vectors work with shapes, so lines, circles, rectangles, gradients, stuff like that. Bitmaps just work with pixels, so usually red, green, blue, triples, sometimes other color spaces, often an alpha channel, which is transparency. Vectors are stored as objects and their parameters. So if you want to resize something, you just change a few numbers associated with the object. If you want your rectangle to be bigger, you can change the width and height of it. Whereas a bitmap is just an array of colors. So if there's a rectangle there, you have to choose a bunch of pixels and convert their color in the array. The editing vectors are just lossless editing. You don't lose anything by changing the shapes or definitions. Whereas bitmaps, you'll often have a loss due to rasterization, like aliasing. And then almost every editing has the potential of introducing little artifacts. And if you were to save it in JPEG, then just don't if you're doing figures like we're talking about today. You'd get all sorts of other artifacts. And then uses, vector graphics are basically the best thing to use for diagrams. If it involves text, it's very good as well. Whereas bitmap is really best used for photos, anything that's photorealistic. And you can embed a photo into vector graphics as well. And then it also ends up being used when you actually display it. So just to give an idea of the difference, I've got an example here, and you can see that all four of these look about the same when they're on the screen. That's because to actually view it, it's been rasterized. But these two are the same. The two on the left are the same vector image, and then the two on the right are rasterized. This one at 96 dots per inch, this one at 300 dots per inch. And so you don't see any difference when we're zoomed out like this, but if we actually zoom into the image, you can start to see the differences. So for for instance, the text becomes fuzzier. Usually the difference is it becomes fuzzier. The lines are inconsistent because they weren't at the same spacing as the DPI, so those are called aliasing effects. But stuff like the gradient looks generally okay. It's just the lines are fuzzed. And with higher resolution, so higher dots per inch, you have less of those effects, but they're still there. Okay, let's return this to the zoom level I had before. Okay. So the kind of next thing is as we were talking amongst ourselves beforehand, a few people had used Illustrator or that had used Inkscape before. There used to be other like options like CorelDRAW, though that's basically died. And these are all vector graphic software, but the main difference between those and Inkscape is that it's open source and it's free. So there are lots of reasons we could argue for using open source, but the main reason is it's free. You don't need a license. You can hand your work to anyone else, and they'll be able to make any changes they need to with it. And you have a pretty good sense that there will be a copy of it available in the future if you need to pull out old data. Okay, so now the interface. The actual interface, so Inkscape, it's a good example of the drawback of using open source software in that the interface starts to become really cluttered. Okay, so the things, there are like 5 or 6 different toolbars on here. There are different panels that will pop up, rulers, everything. The things that are kind of most important, well, in my opinion, are the tool palette, which is almost always at the left. I should ask, does everyone have Inkscape installed? Okay, good. So the tool palette on the left, that's where you'll find so things like selection, editing tools, but also drawing tools like the rectangle. You can do a rectangle and draw it. There's the color palette at the bottom. I don't use this as much, but if you click on it, you can change the fill. And if you shift and click, you can change the stroke. There's the tool options, which is usually immediately above the drawing. So each tool has its own set of options. Selection has a simple transform kind of tools available. There's node editing. With rectangles, you can choose the width and height. And it'll also show the fill and stroke. And then let's hide that because it's blocking one of the most important features on the interface when you're starting off, and that's the tooltip. So if I click this, you'll see on the bottom, no object selected. Click, shift click, and alt scroll mouse on top of objects or drag around objects to select. So that's supposed to tell you that if you drag like that, you can select objects. Click on them or drag around them. And so if you're using a tool or have an object selected, so now it's telling me I've selected a rectangle, and I can click the selection to toggle handles. Okay, and that's just right at the bottom of the screen. So if you're not sure, if you want to discover new behavior, that's a good place to look. I'll put it that way. Okay. I think another very important thing to show is the actual panels. So on the main toolbar, which on my screen on my laptop is up at the top, but on my desktop it's on the right. So you might have to look around for it. This is the one that has new file, save file, grouping and ungrouping, copy and paste, that kind of stuff. There are these icons like text. This one just says edit objects, colors, gradients, arrowheads, and other fill and stroke properties. It's basically the format of the object. So if you click it, the panel comes up. And then if I select this object, I can see there are tabs for fill, stroke, and stroke style. So I can change the fill, maybe make it into a gradient, maybe have it so that it's not filled. And so for any fine control over the color and gradients and fills and opacity and blur of the objects.
Surface, like, I can't really see, but can I do like hex codes?
Oh, yes. There are hex codes for the color there.
Okay.
So the color palette has RGB, hue, saturation, light, CMYK. That's often used for printing. Wheel and CMS. Yeah, so this is stroke paint. So the outline is the stroke, and then the inside is the fill. I need to actually select it again. The inside is the fill, and then stroke style is especially for when you're doing lines and paths. You can add arrowheads and that kind of thing. So this panel is one of the very useful ones. There are also ones for aligning and distributing objects. Yeah.
So I can make this into an arrow?
You can't make,
How
well,
can I draw an arrow?
Well, the best would be to draw a line. So, line or Bezier, and then right click to end it. I'll also talk about that in more detail later. And then you choose the end marker and you can increase the stroke style. Yeah. Okay. And I'll have some kind of tutorial demos to go into more detail. I just want to give a sense of the interface. There's another kind of complication with the interface. And I should also point out that there's a file menu. So if you don't know what the button you want looks like, almost all of the buttons are also available in the file menu. Let's see, the other complication of the interface is it's very much inspired by professional software like drafting software. And so it's very keyboard and mouse oriented. So for instance, most tools have different behavior when you hold down a modifier key. So just with selection, shift click adds to the selection, alt and dragging creates a path selection. You can combine them. So shift and alt and dragging will choose both. So if I choose my selection tool, which is the cursor shaped thing, and I click on one, and I hold down shift and click on the other, it'll grab both. Or if I have nothing selected, I can drag a rectangle around everything. Or if I hold down Alt, which on Macs is Option, then I can draw a line through whatever I want selected. You can see there's a red line that does that. Okay. Those are all kind of behaviors that if you play around a lot, you'll eventually discover as you use the program. I'll also point out kind of a very important one is control. When you hold down control and do operations like move and rotate, it tends to snap onto either horizontal or certain angles so that you don't have complete freehand. It's nice when you're wanting to draw a horizontal line, for example. And then Shift is often used as a kind of secondary key to do the opposite behavior. So Control Z is undo, but Shift Control Z is redo. Okay. And then some notable hotkeys. I'd say most important is Escape, because if you have something selected or you're working with a particular tool and you press Escape, you can basically keep pressing it until you get back to nothing selected and just the tool. I'm going to, so if I'm using some tool to edit this path and move a node around, if I press Escape enough, then I'm back to a selection tool, nothing selected, and it's kind of a clean slate. Okay. And then there are ones for zooming in and out. Minus and plus will zoom in and out. You don't need to hold down Control. You can press 5 to zoom to the whole document. 1 will do a one-to-one of it. And all of those you can get through the view zoom and see what they actually are. Because there are so many hotkeys, all the menu items and every tool will have a little information on the side about what key you use to access it. Okay, so that's enough blabbing about the actual interface and stuff. I've got a few demos to do. For instance, we can just do a bit of a flow chart. That's a rather basic demo, which would be good. I've got to draw a beaker with what are supposed to be bacteria in it. That's a more complicated one. Drawing DNA with a sense of perspective. Doing lattices is a worthwhile one. It's rather simple, but touches on arranging objects. This one, clone stuff. And then this is a recreation of part of a figure from one of Maddie's papers she's working on. And we can also show how to do this. Although I forgot to actually upload the PDF file that has the equations, but I can show that step. Okay, any votes on what looks in, I might just start with the flow, but what do you think, Maddie? Yeah?
Also, these have PDFs in them, so you'll upload PDFs
Yeah.
in the middle of the video.
Yeah, you can import. That's one thing that I probably should have emphasized. The other advantage Inkscape has over almost any other program is it can import almost any graphic format. So you can do scalable vector graphics, PDFs, Adobe Illustrator 9.0 and above, Windows Meta file, which is a weird one, EPS, PDF, CorelDRAW, the list goes on. A bunch of those are vector formats, but it also has, of course, JPEGs and PNGs, and even more primitive things like PNM, TIFF. And then when you save, you can also save as a whole host of things to PDFs, EPS, DXF, I'm sure, LaTeX with PS Tricks macros, like a whole bunch of crazy formats.
So how do you import in that PDF and then do things on top of it?
So
Layers?
there's no, you don't have to worry about layers. I can show that, well, I might as well show it now. So I have a PDF somewhere. Okay, so for instance, this is just a draft of the paper I'm working on. You can choose which page to use. So you just import a specific page. I choose the Poplar import. There isn't much difference, really, okay? And then if I zoom out, then you can see the whole PDF page is imported. But the really convenient, or the nice thing about it is because PDFs are vector format, if you ungroup it, so there's a button here, which is ungroup selected groups. And then it chugs a little bit because there's so many bits. Almost every character is its own option thing. And then I can zoom in. One way of zooming in is holding down Control and pressing the scroll wheel. Okay. And you can pan by holding down middle click if you have a mouse. Okay, and so you can see I can select this equation. I can group it again. And now I have an equation that I can use in my diagram. So I wouldn't import a whole document to do that, but it's useful when you want to, if you have a LaTeX file that just has a bunch of equations or something and import them. Or if you make your documents in Word, you can save as a PDF and load that in there.
So one problem I wanted once to try something like that, and one problem I had is that when I wanted to put this under my figure, I lost the scale, and my font was really nice.
It was all blocky and stuff. So if the PDF is exported well, then it shouldn't have any issues with the resolution. So for instance,
so I wanted to put it in beside the figure that I had.
Yeah.
Then I changed the scale, and then the font was.
And so that doesn't happen when you use vector graphics.
Yeah, the aspect.
Oh, the aspect ratio. Okay.
I couldn't put it back to the correct.
Yeah, so that is a trouble. One thing I might as well mention, there's a lock. So when you have the selection tool, the cursor, and you select an object, you can change the width and height, and there's this lock beside the width, the W for width, and that locks the aspect ratio. So it makes sure that it scales proportionally.
I tried to choose, font 10, for example.
Because these aren't actually text objects, you can't. The other thing I'll mention is if you are doing this and having trouble, you can undo it with Control Z. And if you want to not have to press this lock every time, you can hold down Control when you move it. There. So if I hold down Control, it keeps the aspect ratio locked. Again, Inkscape has all sorts of little hotkeys and stuff and ways of doing the same thing. So if you have the selection tool, the cursor, and select your object, the menu, it should be directly above your drawing, or all the tool options associated with it. And so there's X, Y, width, height. You can press a lock button that's beside width, and that locks it. And then to rescale it, you can grab the handles and click and drag them, and it rescales them. Okay. So, shall we try something, an actual thing? Yeah.
Can you please talk a little bit about the ruler thing?
Oh, the ruler? So
if you never watched about it, it looks like it measures things.
yes, it's
But
D.
can I make it like stay on the page, or what does it do? Does it just
This so
kind of like measure the distance of things from everything?
yeah, it's
measuring things in millimeters.
It's measured in millimeters by
Is that all
default.
it does?
Sort of. You can add guides. So if you drag in from the edge, you can bring in horizontal guides. From the corner gets you 45-degree guides. And it just I should also say this box that's stuck here the whole time is the page that you're drawing on. And so the 0 and 0 mark is the bottom left-hand corner of the page here. And the numbers on the ruler line up with that.
But the numbers, you can't get those to stick around.
You mean you'd like to copy them onto your image? No, there isn't a way to do that. Okay, I'm going to. So Maddie was interested in the DNA one. That's actually a nice example.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to open it. Where's study group? There it is. Lessons. So I've got it in my fork of the study group repo, and I'll be adding a pull request to the main one. So this lesson with the demo files will be in there. They just don't have the step-by-steps associated with it. So DNA. Okay. Oh, there is a complication with this one too. Okay. So I think the first thing. So that's kind of the final product that I'm aiming to get.
How is that your page is different now? How can I change this?
Okay, I was going to show it later, but in document properties, so in the file menu, you go to document properties, which for some reason has its own hotkey because everything has a hotkey in Inkscape. You can choose different page sizes and orientations. The one I use all the time is resize page to content. So what I'll typically do is draw the figure that I want and then just click this and it resizes it to fit the content. Apparently I have some kind of object here that's hidden. Yeah, so that invisible rectangle made my document a bit bigger. Okay. You can also select a specific part of it. Go to that and resize to just that selection. And if
you want to revert, change?
Control undo will do it. Okay. And I'm going to delete that weird rectangle. Okay. So I'm remembering that the one problem with this demo is the way I did the sine curve. So who has Python 2 installed on computers? Python version 2.7? It doesn't work with 3, unfortunately. We do another one. or you can yeah, I'll show the thing that goes wrong. So in order to get this helix, there are all sorts of extensions. A helix viewed from the side is just a sine curve. So unless you view it at an angle. But if you view it directly from the side, it's a sine curve. So there's an extension under the render submenu, and it's called function plotter. Okay, now to use it, you need to have a rectangle. That's where the function is going to be drawn. You can have your start, finish. You can choose to multiply the range by 2 pi, which is useful for cosine and sine. And then you can choose the number of points, number of samples. Do the function. You can give it the first derivative if you want it to have a more accurate curve, or if you know what the derivative is. It just makes the curve smoother. And then it has a little bit of use about it. So if I do this and then choose, so for this one, I'll just be absurd and choose a bad number, like 5. And I apply that. And I forgot that I didn't have LXML installed on this. I prepped it on another one. But so you'll run into an error if you don't have software. And in my case, I'm missing a library in Python, and it'll draw it. And it'll draw the sine curve. And then the sine curve is just a path. So if I either choose the path editing tool or double click on the path, I can see the different nodes like that. So these squares are nodes. If I move them around, I change the shape of the path, and they're Bezier curves, so I can change the handles and really mess with the shape. Okay. And so what was done for this one is I took 2 curves. I'll show that slowly. I duplicated it with the duplicate tool. Then I moved it over, and you can hold down Control to make sure that it stays horizontal. Okay. And then I switch to the node editing tool, and I shift and click to select both. Then you can highlight the nodes at the top, and there's this button here called Break Path at Selected Nodes. So what that'll do is it'll split the path into subpaths that are now disjoint. And then I can do the same at the bottom. And the reason why I want to do this is because I want to have a closed shape that I can fill. So you see this one is a closed shape, that's that part of the path. Okay. Now all of them are stuck together, and I want each individual path that I've created. So you can break apart, and now you have a whole bunch of different individual paths like that. I select these 2 because they're going to be part of the same path. I combine them, then edit it, go into the node editor. And there's another button here where you can join 2 with a line segment. So you do that with those 2, that with those 2. And then you can just fill it with whatever color you like. And that's the first segment. And then you repeat that with a couple others, and then you can copy them over. So that's the most complicated part of this one. It's that breaking the nodes apart. If you do the same thing for these 2 lines, then you get this shape here, and then you get this shape too. And then if I was to select, so if I have these, then I can just duplicate them Or so I use duplicate a lot. You can also use clone, which keeps it linked to the original if you want the colors to all be the same. Okay, and then move it over. And I might as well show the issue with snapping. Okay. So there's a snapping tool on the side. And you can choose objects to snap to. It'll default to have snapping at cusp nodes, which are, let's zoom in a bit. Cusp nodes are the corners, basically. So if I select both of these again, I can press Control D to duplicate it, and then move it sideways. And if I hold it close to where I want, the cusps should recognize you. Oh wait, I need the smooth node too. Smooth node too. There we go. The smooth node and cusp node will recognize each other and overlap. And then you have a fun perspective game where this one looks like it's on top of that one, but it isn't. Okay, and then you can use this lower selection one step and do that. Lower selection. So objects are drawn on top of each other, and this just says make it lower down in the order that they're drawn. Okay, so it's not layers. Well, there are layers, but I'm not using them at all. They're just first. So for instance, first this object here is drawn, and then this object is drawn, and then this object is drawn, and then this one. So as it just puts them one on top of each other, but they're not in separate layers.
And if you want to change the order, those are going.
Yes. Okay. Let's do another one.
Grouping and combine are the same thing. You said combine them. Is it the same as grouping?
No, grouping and combining are different. Combine is under the path menu. It's specifically for path objects, whereas grouping will group any kind of object.
What is it?
It's a curve. Or a closed curve. Okay. Okay, is there interest in another demo? Yeah, so we've got a basic kind of flow chart. Yeah. What time is it? 6:51.
And the last one.
This, this last one is also basically a flow chart, but using symbols instead. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to open it up myself so that I have it viewed. There. Okay, if you want to download it yourself, you can, well, it's available at mine, jlayden, or github.com/jlayden. It's the study group project, lessons miscellaneous, Inkscape intro. Yeah. Okay. And that'll be, and then it's the phage. Oh wait, did I? It's the phage flow demo that has the more interesting stuff. I have to download it too. Okay. Raw. You can also see that SVG file is just text. It's a specific language. Let's just save it to my desktop. Okay. The other funny thing is Inkscape actually saves the window size in the file. So you'll find that it'll resize your window on you when you open a new file. Okay. So this is the target. Let's draw it. Okay, so a first step would be to make one of the objects that you want. So this guy here, I'm going to just duplicate him, move him over, and resize so that we can see it more clearly. Okay. So the way I made this one was I first took a rectangle. Okay. And I want a black stroke. So if I go to the fill and stroke panel, choose stroke paint to be black or to be a flat color, and then choose your choice of color space and choose black. Okay. And then for the fill, I'll choose a darker gray. So I can, one option is to use the panel there. Okay, this one was inspired by one of Maddie's diagrams. Okay, so then making sure that we're still on the rectangle tool. If you're not on the rectangle tool, you can just double click it. There are two square handles that you can click and drag on. Those resize. And then there's this other one here, which does a corner radius. Okay, and you can see it actually left. It's this, so there, my mouse jumped. Okay, so on the corner of it, there's a circular handle, a little circle there. And you can click that and create round corners. So that's an easy way of making a box with circular sides. There's this second handle appeared. If you play with that one, you can actually make them all belong at different rates. Okay, and so that's how I made that shape. The shape on top is just a hexagon. So I can choose, there it is. This tool here creates stars and polygons. And then on the tool options bar, there's a star and there's a polygon label. So I can choose the polygon. I can choose the number of corners to get this. You can also round the corners if you want, but in my case, I'll show you how to do that after the fact. Okay, and so it's completely free form. If I hold down the control button, then it prefers certain orientations. So if I use that and get that orientation, now I have a hexagon. Is everyone following along okay? Okay, so then for the hexagon, I'll choose a lighter gray. Okay, and now there's another detail with this hexagon, and this is, I just stumbled upon by accident. There's this handle here, it's shaped like a diamond. And if you look at if you hold the mouse over, you can look at the tooltip at the bottom, and it says adjust the tip radius of the star or polygon. So it adjusts the diameter of the polygon. And then with Shift to round and with Alt to randomize. So if you hold down the Shift key and then click and drag it, you can really change the shape of it. So moving it one way will make it curve inside. Moving it the other way will make it curve outside. So if you want to make your polygons a little friendlier, you just do that. Okay. And then, okay, so I'm just gonna get rid of that guy. So then I can, so now I can make any little changes that I want, like adjust the stroke style, but that's probably good enough for now. I can actually also, I might as well show this.
But mine doesn't change the color of view of my what I'm doing.
Oh, so there are two ways of adjusting the fill. So if you have the object selected, you can either just click one of the colors on the bottom here, left click, and that will adjust the fill. Or you can bring up the, I call it, or it's the fill and stroke panel, which is this button here, or Shift Control F, and then choose the fill tab, and then choose the color. Afterwards, yeah. Okay, you can also, okay, so then once we have the object the way we like it, we can group it. The advantage of grouping is that now, so it's the group on here. You select the objects, click group. The advantage of grouping it is now I can just click one of the objects and it holds the entire group together. I can also clone it, which we'll see in a second. And then if I want to add a, I can add feature things like shadows and glows. So I can add a drop shadow there. You can change the radius, turn on live preview so we actually see it. There we go. Okay, and reduce the offset. Okay, so you can do little things like this as well. This was under filters, and there's a whole host of filters that you can put on afterwards. It's worth, if you want to start playing around with this stuff, to just look at it, but it's not particularly important. Okay, so that's our object number one. The next one will be this, and apparently, according to Maddie, it should be more like an ellipse or a box with rounded corners, but I'm going to show doing an ellipse. So apparently the last time I drew an ellipse, I actually drew a half arc, so it's defaulting to a half arc. But if I go to the toolbar at the top, there's a button here that says make shape a whole ellipse, not arc or segment. So I click that, and I can get an ellipse. Oh. Okay, and then I can resize it to my heart's content. One thing to note is when you're scaling, sometimes it'll change the stroke thickness too, in ways that you don't want. There are options up here for turning off scaling the stroke and the corner radius and stuff like that. Okay. So I get the approximate ellipse-like shape that I want, which is close to the path. I can then go to the path menu, select object to path. And now if I double click it, it'll bring up the path editing tool, and I can see the different nodes that I can move. And I can move this node in here, make it a little more kidney shaped, say. I can adjust a handle, then just make it look roughly like I like it. The one thing about Bezier curves is I find it's difficult to get exactly the curve you want. So if you're a little overly particular like me, That can be annoying. And so then I've adjusted it. Now I have kind of this kidney bean shape. And then that's the second object. Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat how did you roll up the?
Oh, so on a Bezier curve, there are nodes which are.
How did you make the nodes appear?
Oh, okay. So I drew an ellipse. I made it a circle instead of just an arc. And you can do this with pretty much any shape, but you go to the path menu and you choose the button or option object to path. And so that converts it from a circle to a path. And paths are kind of the most controllable shape tool that you can use. And then there's the nodes editing tool, or you can double click and it brings up the nodes and you adjust them however you like. I grabbed one of the Bezier handles, so it's doing something weird there. Okay. And then Bezier curves, the nodes are on the curve, and then the handles control the tangent to the curve. And that's how you edit them. Okay. So I'm just going to talk. This is really screwed up. There. Okay. So we'll talk quickly about how to actually do the line. Okay. So the next step that would have been is to use this path tool, draw Bezier curves. You can create a straight line by clicking on the start and then the end, and then right click to end it. Go to stroke style in your fill and stroke, and then it's beginning, middle, and end, and you just choose the arrow. And then that's how you can create an arrow. And then the stroke width, if you change the stroke width, that changes the arrowhead as well. Okay, good. So that's, I think, as much as we have time for. So I'll answer that question afterwards. And really, the way to get further is just playing around with it, trying different interfaces. The key concepts are editing paths, converting things down to paths, and grouping them. I'd say those are kind of the key things that you need to start to really go further. Okay.